A billionaire invited his ex to a party just to humiliate her in front of everyone. But when she showed up holding hands with identical triplets, all 4 years old, the shock was so intense, he collapsed on the spot. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The frigid Chicago wind cut through Caroline Miller's wool coat as she stood outside the imposing Kingsley Tower, her breath forming small clouds in the January air. She checked her watch, 2:15 p.m., then reached into her purse, fingers brushing against the 3 plastic sticks she'd been carrying all day like talismans. 3 different brands, 3 identical results. She took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving door into the gleaming marble lobby, her sensible heels clicking against the polished floor. The sound seemed to echo her heartbeat, too fast, too loud, too revealing of her nervousness. "I'm here to see Alexander Kingsley," Caroline told the sleek receptionist behind the curved desk. "Caroline Miller. I should be expected." The receptionist, model thin with immaculate makeup, glanced at her computer screen, then up at Caroline, eyes sweeping over her department store dress and slightly wind-blown hair. Something like a smirk flickered across her perfect features. 32nd floor. His assistant will meet you at the elevator." Caroline nodded her thanks and walked toward the bank of elevators, conscious of how out of place she felt among the expensive suits and designer heels that populated the lobby. 6 months ago, when Alexander had first asked her to dinner after she'd finished tutoring his niece in literature, she'd been similarly intimidated. But he had smiled at her then, that disarming, genuine smile that made his blue-gray eyes crinkle at the corners, and told her he found her refreshingly authentic in a world of artifice. The elevator was mercifully empty. As it ascended, Caroline smoothed her dress and tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would tell him. They hadn't planned this, certainly, but they'd been together for 6 months now. Alexander had taken her to Michelin-starred restaurants, flown her to his Lake Michigan vacation home in his private helicopter. Just 3 weeks ago, he'd whispered, "You're extraordinary," against her skin as they lay tangled in his Egyptian cotton sheets. They had something real. She was sure of it. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. A woman in her 40s with a severe bob and wire-rimmed glasses waited for her. "Ms. Miller, follow me, please." Caroline followed the assistant down a hallway lined with awards and press features celebrating Alexander Kingsley, 30 years old and already revolutionizing the tech industry with Kingsley Innovations. The magazine covers showed his confident smile, his perfectly tailored suits, his authoritative stance. Fortune magazine had named him one of the 40 under 40 to watch last year. The assistant knocked on a heavy oak door before opening it and announcing, "Ms. Miller is here, Mr. Kingsley." She stepped aside, allowing Caroline to enter, then quietly closed the door behind her. Alexander didn't look up from his computer. He sat at an imposing glass desk, the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him framing Chicago's skyline like a living backdrop to his success story. At 30, he already commanded a technological empire valued at billions, his dark hair perfectly styled, his custom suit hanging impeccably on his athletic frame. "I'll be with you in a moment," he said, fingers still tapping at his keyboard. Caroline stood awkwardly by the door, clutching her purse. The office was minimalist and expensive, all glass, chrome, and black leather. A single photograph sat on his desk, Alexander shaking hands with the governor at a tech summit. After what felt like an eternity, he finally looked up. There was no smile, no warmth in his eyes, just cool assessment, as if she were a business proposition he wasn't particularly interested in. "Caroline, what was so urgent that it couldn't wait until tonight?" She swallowed hard, moving closer to his desk. I thought this should be discussed in person, privately." Alexander leaned back in his chair, an impatient look crossing his features. "I have a board meeting in 45 minutes. What is it?" Caroline's hands trembled as she reached into her purse and withdrew the 3 pregnancy tests, carefully wrapped in tissue. She placed them on the glass desk between them. "I'm pregnant, Alex." Silence. Complete, devastating silence. Then Alexander's eyes flicked down to the tests and back up to her face. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened, became more distant. "You're sure they're mine?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Caroline took a half step back, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. "Of course they're yours. How can you even ask that?" Alexander stood smoothly, walking to a bar cart in the corner of his office. He poured himself a generous measure of amber liquid, the 18-year-old Macallan he'd once taught her to appreciate. He didn't offer her a glass. "We've been careful. Always." He took a slow sip, staring out at the city below. "This shouldn't have happened. I know it's unexpected, but this was a mistake, Caroline." His voice was cool, detached. "We had fun, but you always knew this was temporary." Caroline felt as though the floor beneath her had suddenly disappeared. "Temporary? Alex, we've been together for 6 months. You introduced me to your family. You took me to your company Christmas party." A flash of impatience crossed his face. "As my date, yes. Not as someone permanent." He turned to face her fully, leaning against the window. The vast city spread out behind him, a kingdom he commanded with effortless authority. "You really think someone in my position would choose someone like you to build a family with?" Each word landed like a shard of ice. Caroline stood frozen, unable to process the transformation of the man before her, from the attentive, passionate lover she thought she knew to this cold stranger. "Someone like me?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. Alexander sighed, as if explaining something obvious to a child. "A high school teacher from Ohio who can barely afford rent in a decent neighborhood. You're common, Caroline, predictable, not the kind of woman someone like me would present to Chicago society." Caroline felt tears threatening but forced them back. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of him. I thought what we had was real. What we had was convenient while it lasted." Alexander set his glass down and returned to his desk, opening a drawer. "I have an IPO in 3 months and plans to marry the daughter of Maxwell Communications CEO next year. Did you really think I'd trade all that for you?" He pulled out a checkbook and began writing without hesitation. "I'll be generous. $100,000 should resolve this inconvenience." He tore the check free and held it out to her. "Use it for a discreet procedure or to raise the baby away from here. I don't care which. But don't expect my name to be involved." Caroline stared at the check, feeling sick. "I don't want your money, Alexander. I thought we were nothing more than a diversion." He cut her off sharply. "Look, I'm trying to be fair here. Take the check." When Caroline made no move to accept it, Alexander's expression hardened. He pressed a button on his desk phone. "Janet, please send security to my office. Ms. Miller is leaving." "Security?" Caroline whispered, disbelief washing over her. "You're having me escorted out?" Alexander's face remained impassive as he slid the check across the desk toward her. "This is a business transaction now, Caroline. Take the money and go quietly." The door opened behind her, and 2 large men in dark suits entered. "Ms. Miller needs to leave," Alexander instructed coldly. "Please ensure she exits the building." "Alex, please," Caroline began, but he had already returned his attention to his computer screen, dismissing her completely. One security guard took her elbow firmly but not roughly. "Ma'am, this way, please." Caroline allowed herself to be led to the elevator, the pregnancy tests left behind on Alexander's desk like discarded trash. The security guards flanked her in the elevator, their presence making the spacious car feel claustrophobic. She stared at the decreasing floor numbers, fighting to maintain composure, refusing to let the tears fall until she was alone. When they reached the lobby, the guards escorted her across the polished marble floor, past curious onlookers and the smirking receptionist. They released her only when they reached the revolving door. "Have a good day, ma'am," one said mechanically. Outside, the bitter wind seemed welcoming compared to the coldness she'd just experienced. Caroline walked numbly to the corner, turned into an alley between buildings, and finally let the tears come. She sobbed, one hand against the rough brick wall, the other pressed against her stomach where new life grew, life that Alexander Kingsley had dismissed as an inconvenience. As her tears subsided, a strange calm settled over her. She straightened, wiped her face, and looked back at Kingsley Tower rising into the steel-gray sky. "I'll do this without you," she whispered. "I'll do this despite you." That cold Chicago night, as Caroline trembled in the unforgiving wind, she couldn't imagine that in 15 years she would be in that same building, not as an unwelcome visitor, but as the most powerful businesswoman at the technology conference, watching Alexander Kingsley struggle for her attention. Caroline trudged up the crumbling concrete steps to her apartment building, the bitter Chicago wind biting through her thin coat. The conversation with Alexander still echoed in her mind like a bad dream. Had it really only been 3 hours since her world collapsed? The security guards' stern faces, the receptionist's smirk, and worst of all, Alexander's cold dismissal, "You're common, Caroline," played on repeat in her thoughts. Her key stuck in the lock, requiring the usual jiggle and forceful push. Inside, her apartment felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in on her new reality. She dropped her purse on the kitchenette counter, noticing the blinking light on her answering machine. 3 messages. The first was from Westfield Academy, the prestigious private school where she taught literature. "Ms. Miller, this is Headmaster Richards. Please call me back at your earliest convenience regarding an urgent matter." Caroline frowned. She'd taken a personal day for her appointment with Alexander, all properly arranged. The second message began playing. "Caroline, it's Alexander's assistant. Mr. Kingsley wanted me to confirm that you received his offer. Please acknowledge receipt by tomorrow." Her stomach twisted. The check. She'd left it on his desk, refusing to take his blood money. The third message made her sink into a chair. "Ms. Miller, Headmaster Richards again. I'm afraid I need to inform you that your position at Westfield Academy has been terminated, effective immediately. Your personal items will be packed and sent to your address. This decision is final. We'll mail your last paycheck." Caroline sat in stunned silence. Westfield Academy, where she'd taught for only 7 months since moving to Chicago, was owned by Lawrence Thornton, a close friend of Alexander's. The connection wasn't difficult to make. In less than 4 hours, she'd lost her boyfriend, her job, and any illusion of security for the life growing inside her. The tears came again, but differently this time, hot, angry tears that burned her cheeks. "Damn you, Alexander," she whispered into the empty apartment. 2 weeks later, Caroline sat across from her landlord in his cluttered office. Mr. Patel reviewed her lease agreement with a sympathetic but firm expression. "Ms. Miller, I understand your situation is difficult, but you're 3 weeks behind on rent. I have other tenants waiting for units." "I just need a little more time," Caroline pleaded. "I have interviews lined up. Once I find a new position—" "I'm sorry," Mr. Patel interrupted gently. "I've been as flexible as I can be. You'll need to vacate by the end of the month." Caroline nodded numbly, gathering her purse. On the street, she pulled out the classified section of the Chicago Tribune, circling another rental ad in a neighborhood she'd previously avoided due to its high crime rate. The rent was half what she currently paid, and possibly within reach of her dwindling savings. The apartment she viewed that afternoon had peeling paint, a single hanging light bulb in each room, and neighbors whose arguments penetrated the thin walls. The landlord, a large man who smelled of cigarettes, didn't ask for references or seem concerned about her employment status. "First and last month's rent, cash only," he grunted. "Take it or leave it." Caroline took it, handing over a significant portion of her remaining funds. She would move in 3 days. "I'm sorry, but we've decided to go with someone else," said the restaurant manager, not meeting Caroline's eyes as he handed back her application. His gaze flickered briefly to her midsection, where a small but noticeable bump had begun to form at 14 weeks. Caroline forced a smile. "Thank you for your consideration." Outside Tony's diner, she checked off another entry on her increasingly tattered list of potential employers. This was the third restaurant to reject her application this week. The reception job at the dental office had done the same yesterday, the office manager barely hiding her disapproval when Caroline mentioned she would need maternity leave in 6 months. She found a bench in a small park and sat down, allowing herself 5 minutes of rest before trying the next place on her list. Across the street, a massive billboard displayed Alexander's confident face alongside the Kingsley Innovations logo. "The future has a name," the tagline proclaimed. Caroline turned away, unable to bear the sight of the man who had so casually discarded her. Her phone buzzed, a reminder for tomorrow's doctor's appointment at the free clinic. Her first ultrasound. She should have been sharing this milestone with someone who cared, not facing it alone in a crowded public clinic. The waiting room of the Cook County Public Health Clinic was packed with women in various stages of pregnancy, many with other children in tow. Caroline sat between a teenager who looked terrified and an exhausted mother of 3 who kept nodding off between reprimanding her toddlers. "Miller, Caroline?" called a nurse after nearly 2 hours of waiting. The examination room was small but clean. The nurse, a kind-faced woman in her 50s named Nancy, took Caroline's vitals and asked routine questions about her health history. "First pregnancy?" Nancy asked, making notes on her chart. "Yes," Caroline replied, her voice small. "Father involved?" Caroline hesitated. "No." Nancy's expression didn't change, but her voice softened. "All right, let's take a look at your baby. The doctor will be in shortly to discuss everything with you." The ultrasound gel was cold on Caroline's skin. As Nancy moved the wand across her abdomen, the screen remained facing away from Caroline. Nancy's brow furrowed slightly. She adjusted the wand, moved it to different positions, and stared intently at the screen. "Is everything okay?" Caroline asked, anxiety rising in her chest. "I'm going to get the doctor," Nancy said, her professional tone not quite hiding something unexpected. "Just relax." The minutes crawled by. Caroline stared at the ceiling, imagining worst-case scenarios. When the door finally opened, a middle-aged doctor entered alongside Nancy. "Miss Miller, I'm Dr. Santiago," she said, taking over the ultrasound wand. She moved it deliberately across Caroline's abdomen, studying the screen. After a moment, she turned the monitor so Caroline could see. "Congratulations," Dr. Santiago said with a smile. "We have not 1, but 3 hearts beating here." Caroline stared at the screen, trying to make sense of the grainy black and white images. 3? "Triplets," the doctor confirmed. 3 separate amniotic sacs, 3 healthy heartbeats. You're carrying identical triplets, which is quite rare, about 1 in 200,000 pregnancies. The room seemed to spin. Triplets. Not 1 baby to care for alone, but 3. 3 mouths to feed, 3 college educations to save for, 3 of everything on her non-existent income. The news that should have been celebrated with champagne and embraces was met with silent tears in a public clinic exam room. That evening, in her new apartment where boxes remained unpacked and a single mattress on the floor served as her bed, Caroline made a decision. She found her phone and dialed Alexander's private number, the one he'd once insisted she use anytime, day or night. It went directly to voicemail, as she'd expected. "Alexander, it's Caroline," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm calling to let you know that I'm pregnant with triplets. Identical triplets. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know." She hung up, knowing he would never return the call. The following weeks established a grueling pattern. Caroline found work as a waitress at a 24-hour diner, taking the overnight shift when her pregnancy was less noticeable under the loose uniform. She slept during the day, applied for better jobs in the late afternoon, and worked from 11 at night until 7 in the morning. Her feet swelled, her back ached constantly, and exhaustion became her permanent state. It lasted until her 19th week, when the manager called her into his office at the end of her shift. "Look, Caroline," he said awkwardly, "you're a good worker, but customers are commenting about your condition. It's not the image we want for the night shift. I'm going to have to let you go." She nodded, too tired to argue. It was her third job lost due to her pregnancy. That afternoon, Caroline sat in the small park near her apartment, watching mothers push strollers and children play. Her hands rested on her now prominent belly, feeling the occasional flutter of movement from within. Across the street, a new billboard had been erected, even larger than the last one. Alexander's face smiled confidently next to the announcement, "Kingsley Innovations IPO, the future begins now." "My children will have a name too," Caroline whispered, caressing her belly. "Mine. And someday when they ask about you, I'll tell them you gave us the greatest gift, the chance to prove we're extraordinary without you." That night, Caroline cleared her small kitchen table and found a notebook and pen. She opened to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "5-year plan." Beneath it, she outlined her strategy. She would use her literature background and her programming hobby to create a digital educational platform. Her college capstone project on adaptive learning would be the foundation. While her babies slept, she would work. While they grew, she would build. One day, the name Miller would be as recognized as Kingsley, not through inheritance or connections, but through innovation and perseverance. As she wrote deep into the night, a sense of purpose replaced her despair. Alexander had called her common and predictable, but she would prove him wrong. Her children would not grow up in shame or poverty. They would be raised by a mother who transformed rejection into opportunity, abandonment into strength. While Caroline scribbled her plans in a cheap notebook by candlelight, she couldn't imagine that those crumpled pages contained the embryo of what would become Edu Mines, valued at billions, with headquarters on 3 continents. Caroline's calendar hung on the refrigerator door, days meticulously crossed off as her pregnancy progressed. Today marked 28 weeks, the beginning of her 3rd trimester with triplets. Her once slender frame had transformed dramatically, her belly now so prominent that strangers openly stared when she ventured outside. She studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror while brushing her teeth, barely recognizing the exhausted woman staring back at her. "Good morning, boys," she whispered, rubbing her swollen abdomen where movement had become constant and sometimes painful. According to her dog-eared pregnancy book, each baby was now roughly the size of an eggplant. 3 eggplants fighting for space in her increasingly cramped uterus. The apartment's thin walls carried the sound of her neighbor's television, a morning news program discussing the Kingsley Innovations IPO. Caroline quickly turned on the shower to drown out Alexander's name. She had enough challenges today without his ghost haunting her thoughts. Her most pressing concern was making it to her prenatal appointment at the free clinic. The doctor had been increasingly worried about her blood pressure and the possibility of preterm labor, common with multiple pregnancies but especially dangerous with triplets. Caroline dressed carefully in her most comfortable maternity dress, donated by a church charity, and gathered her paperwork for the bus. In the kitchen, she forced down a breakfast of peanut butter toast and prenatal vitamins. Her phone rang, a potential employer calling about the remote editing job she'd applied for last week. "I'm sorry, Ms. Miller," the woman said after a brief conversation. "Your qualifications are impressive, but we need someone who can commit to a minimum 1-year contract without interruptions." Another rejection. Caroline added it to her mental tally as she locked her apartment door and began the slow journey down 3 flights of stairs. No elevator in this building, one of many inconveniences she'd accepted to afford the rent. 3 separate heartbeats, all strong, the ultrasound technician confirmed, moving the wand across Caroline's belly. "Baby A is here, baby B here, and baby C tucked behind his brothers." "Doctor." Santiago studied the monitor with a slight frown. They're smaller than I'd like at 28 weeks, especially baby C. How's your nutrition, Caroline? I'm following the diet plan, she answered, omitting that sometimes she stretched her food budget by eating less than recommended. The doctor's expression softened. You're doing everything right under difficult circumstances, but these little ones need more calories than you're getting. I'm prescribing additional supplements and referring you to the hospital's food assistance program. Caroline nodded, blinking back tears. Even her body was failing her babies. Have you thought about what happens after they arrive? Dr. Santiago asked gently. Triplets are an enormous challenge even with support systems. I have a plan, Caroline replied with more confidence than she felt. I'm developing an educational software platform that I can work on from home while they sleep. Dr. Santiago looked skeptical but didn't push further. Your blood pressure concerns me. I want to see you weekly now, and you need to rest as much as possible. These babies could come very early, and we want to keep them inside growing as long as we can. As Caroline struggled to sit up, the doctor hesitated. Caroline, I have to ask, has the father's situation changed? Is there any possibility of support? Caroline shook her head. He made his position clear. We're on our own. Back in her apartment, Caroline spread her research materials across the kitchen table, her old college textbooks on educational psychology, programming manuals, and sketches of user interfaces. Her college capstone project on adaptive learning for different cognitive styles had won awards but gathered dust since graduation. Now, it might be their salvation. She opened her laptop, a 6-year-old model that wheezed when running multiple programs, and began coding a basic prototype. The idea was elegant in its simplicity, software that adapted to each student's learning patterns, providing personalized educational content that evolved with their progress. A sharp pain interrupted her concentration. Caroline breathed through it, recognizing a Braxton Hicks contraction, practice for the real thing. Dr. Santiago had warned they would increase as her pregnancy progressed. When the discomfort passed, she returned to coding, losing herself in the work until a knock at the door startled her. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, stood in the hallway with a casserole dish. Thought you might like some dinner, dear, the woman said, her eyes kind behind thick glasses. You're feeding 4 now, after all. Caroline accepted the dish gratefully. Mrs. Jenkins had become an unexpected ally, occasionally bringing food or sitting with Caroline during particularly difficult days. How are you managing? Mrs. Jenkins asked, glancing around the sparse apartment. One day at a time, Caroline answered with a tired smile. The older woman nodded toward Caroline's laptop. Working on something important? My future, Caroline replied. And theirs. By 32 weeks, Caroline's body rebelled against the strain of carrying triplets. Her ankles disappeared beneath puffy swelling, her back ached constantly, and sleeping became nearly impossible as the babies grew more active. Dr. Santiago had ordered bed rest, an impossible luxury for a woman living alone without income. Caroline compromised, working on her prototype from her bed, laptop propped on a pillow over her enormous belly. Mrs. Jenkins checked on her daily, bringing groceries and staying for brief visits. During one such visit, Caroline explained her software concept. The educational system treats all students the same, she said, showing Mrs. Jenkins her simple interface design. But we know children learn differently. Some are visual learners, others auditory or kinesthetic. My program identifies a student's learning style and adapts automatically. Mrs. Jenkins studied the screen. And you created this while growing 3 human beings? You're quite remarkable, Caroline Miller. Caroline blushed. It's still just a prototype. I need more time to develop it properly. Time is something your little ones might not give you, Mrs. Jenkins observed, pointing to Caroline's belly where visible movements rippled across the surface. That night, Caroline lay awake, feeling her son's restless movements. Just a few more weeks, boys, she whispered. Give Mommy a little more time to prepare. But the universe had other plans. The contractions began at 4 in the morning, 33 weeks into her pregnancy. Caroline recognized immediately that these weren't practice contractions. They came with alarming regularity and increasing intensity. She reached for her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. "I'm pregnant with triplets," she gasped when the operator answered. "I'm having contractions. I think it's too early." While waiting for the ambulance, Caroline called Mrs. Jenkins, who promised to meet her at the hospital. The pain intensified as paramedics arrived, strapping her onto a stretcher and racing through pre-dawn Chicago streets. In the emergency room, everything accelerated. Dr. Santiago appeared, somehow on duty at this ungodly hour, her face set in professional concern. 33 weeks with triplets is actually not bad, she reassured Caroline as nurses connected monitors to her belly. "But we need to be prepared for complications. The NICU team is standing by." Caroline nodded through another contraction, terror mixing with determination. "Will they be okay?" "They're fighters, just like their mother," Dr. Santiago answered, checking the monitors. "But I'm concerned about baby C. His heart rate is showing distress." The words triggered a cascade of activity. Caroline found herself being rushed to an operating room, consent forms thrust before her for emergency cesarean section. "I'm scared," she admitted to Mrs. Jenkins, who had arrived still wearing her housecoat and slippers. The older woman squeezed her hand. "You won't be alone. I'll be waiting right here." Under harsh operating room lights, Caroline felt strangely detached as the anesthesiologist explained the spinal block procedure. She focused on a single thought. Soon she would meet her sons, the tiny lives that had given her purpose when everything else was taken away. "You'll feel pressure but no pain," Dr. Santiago explained from behind her surgical mask. "We need to move quickly for baby C." Caroline nodded, tears sliding down her temples into her hair. In this moment of extremity, Alexander's abandonment seemed distant, almost irrelevant. These were her children, her future, her new beginning. A pressure unlike anything she'd experienced, then activity beyond the blue surgical drape. A tiny, indignant cry pierced the clinical atmosphere. "Baby A," announced Dr. Santiago, "a boy, as expected." Seconds later, another cry joined the first. "Baby B, another healthy boy!" Caroline held her breath, waiting for the third cry. Silence stretched for several excruciating seconds before a weaker wail finally emerged. "Baby C is here," Dr. Santiago said with audible relief. Smaller than his brothers but fighting hard. 3 babies, whisked immediately to waiting incubators, glimpsed only briefly as they passed. Tiny red faces, impossibly small limbs, translucent skin. Caroline reached out instinctively, but they were already gone, rushed to the NICU by the specialized team. "They need immediate care," a nurse explained gently. "You'll see them soon." As the surgical team completed their work, Caroline felt an overwhelming emptiness. For months, she'd carried 3 lives within her body. Now they were separate beings, fighting their own battles in plastic boxes somewhere in the hospital. Hours later, wheeled into the neonatal intensive care unit in a hospital bed, Caroline finally saw her sons properly. 3 incubators stood side by side, each containing a tiny infant connected to monitors and tubes. The NICU nurse introduced them formally. "This is Ethan, your firstborn. He weighs 4 pounds, 3 ounces. Caroline reached through the incubator's porthole, gently touching Ethan's miniature hand. His fingers reflexively curled around her pinky, a grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "This is Oliver, 4 pounds even." Oliver was slightly redder than his brother, his face scrunched in what looked like concentration. "And this is Noah, 3 pounds, 5 ounces. He's the smallest but holding his own." Noah barely filled half the incubator, his thin chest rising and falling with the help of a breathing apparatus. Caroline's heart constricted at his fragility. "They're beautiful," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. The nurse checked something on Noah's monitor. "Will their father be visiting?" she asked conversationally. The question pierced Caroline's momentary happiness. In this most significant moment of her life, she was alone. No partner to share the wonder, fear, and overwhelming love. "No," she answered softly. "It's just us." She touched each incubator in turn, making a silent promise to the tiny fighters inside. "You'll never know he didn't want you," she whispered when the nurse stepped away. "For you, he simply won't exist." In that sterile NICU room, Caroline couldn't imagine that 15 years later, these three fragile, premature babies would become brilliant young prodigies courted by the world's best universities, while their biological father watched their achievements on television, consumed by regret. Caroline gently traced her finger along the edge of Ethan's incubator, marveling at how much he had grown in the 3 years since those terrifying first days in the NICU. All three boys had defied the odds, each emerging from the hospital after weeks of careful monitoring. Noah, the smallest, the last to come home after nearly 2 months. The digital clock on her nightstand read 4:30 in the morning. Caroline had been awake since 3, using these precious quiet hours to work on her educational software platform before the triplets woke up. She closed her laptop and tiptoed from the bedroom to check on her sons. Their small apartment had only 2 bedrooms, Caroline in one, all 3 boys sharing the other. 3 identical toddler beds lined the walls, each occupied by a sleeping 3-year-old with tousled dark hair. In sleep, they looked even more alike, though Caroline could distinguish them instantly. Ethan, the firstborn, slept with his arms flung wide as if embracing the world. Oliver curled on his side, one hand tucked under his cheek. Noah, still slightly smaller than his brothers, slept in a tight ball, knees drawn to his chest. Caroline allowed herself 5 minutes to simply watch them breathe before returning to her work. These silent moments felt sacred, proof that she had done something right despite overwhelming odds. By 5:15, she was back at her small desk in the corner of the living room, coding furiously before the chaos of the day began. The prototype of her adaptive learning platform was taking shape, built on the foundations of her college project. Each night she added more functionality, refined the algorithms, and dreamed of what it could become. At 6 o'clock precisely, the first stirrings came from the boys' room. Caroline saved her work and went to start breakfast. Morning routines with triplets required military precision. "Mommy!" Ethan was first to appear, still in dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up at impossible angles. "I dreamed about robots." "Did they have laser eyes?" Caroline asked, pouring milk into 3 identical cups. "No, they were teaching robots, like in your computer." Caroline smiled. Even at 3, Ethan showed uncanny understanding of her work. She lifted him onto a chair at their small kitchen table just as Oliver appeared, methodically counting his steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, he continued until reaching his chair. 22 steps from bed to table, he announced proudly. "Very good counting," Caroline praised, setting a bowl of cereal before him. Oliver's fascination with numbers had emerged before he could properly speak. Noah arrived last, clutching a crumpled piece of paper. "Made this for you," he mumbled, offering the drawing, a surprisingly complex pattern of interlocking shapes in crayon. "It's beautiful," Caroline said, genuinely impressed. Noah communicated more through art than words, his drawings already showing remarkable spatial awareness. Breakfast was predictably chaotic. Spilled milk, cereal negotiations, Oliver got more Cheerios, and rapid-fire questions that Caroline answered while simultaneously wiping faces, preventing falls, and mentally reviewing her day's schedule. By 7:30, all 3 boys were dressed in matching outfits, practical, inexpensive clothing that Caroline bought in bulk when on sale. She corralled them toward the door for their morning walk to the small park down the street, a ritual that burned some of their boundless energy before she needed to work. "Blocks by colors today," Ethan announced as they settled in the living room after returning from the park. He methodically began sorting his toys while Oliver counted each one. 14 red blocks, 6 blue blocks, Oliver reported with satisfaction. Noah sat slightly apart, arranging patterns that looked random but revealed complex symmetry upon closer inspection. Caroline observed them while setting up her laptop on the kitchen table. These quiet moments of independent play were precious work windows. Her remote job as a content reviewer for educational websites paid modestly but offered flexible hours, essential for a single mother of triplets. At 9 o'clock, a gentle knock at the door announced Mrs. Jenkins' arrival. The elderly woman had become Caroline's lifeline, watching the boys for a few hours each day in exchange for help with groceries and household tasks. "Good morning, my little geniuses," Mrs. Jenkins greeted, her silver hair neatly pinned back. The boys rushed to hug her legs, already devoted to their adopted grandmother. "Ethan organized blocks by color again," Caroline explained as she gathered her work materials. "Noah has been drawing all morning and Oliver—" "I counted to 100 backwards," Oliver interrupted proudly. Mrs. Jenkins raised her eyebrows at Caroline, who nodded confirmation. "He started doing that last week." "Remarkable," Mrs. Jenkins murmured. "These boys are special, Caroline." "All children are special," Caroline replied automatically, though privately she had begun to recognize that her son's development was accelerated compared to other children their age. "Go work," Mrs. Jenkins shooed her toward the door. "We'll be fine. I brought cookie dough for us to bake later." Caroline kissed each boy goodbye and headed to the small cafe 8 blocks away that offered free Wi-Fi with purchase. The walk gave her time to mentally switch from mother to professional, both roles equally demanding but requiring different parts of her brain. The cafe, Beans and Bites, had become her unofficial office. For the price of a small coffee nursed over hours, she could access reliable internet faster than the spotty connection in her apartment. The baristas knew her by name now, occasionally slipping her a free refill or day-old pastry. Caroline settled at her usual corner table, positioned so she could see both the entrance and the sidewalk outside. She arranged her materials neatly: laptop, notebook filled with coding notes, and a worn textbook on educational psychology borrowed from the public library. The morning passed in a blur of focused work. She reviewed educational content for her paying job first, then switched to her own project, coding the adaptive learning algorithms that would eventually become EduMinds. Lost in the work, she barely noticed the lunch rush come and go. Her concentration was broken by a newspaper left on the neighboring table. The business section featured a familiar face: Alexander Kingsley announcing Kingsley Innovations' latest product launch. Caroline quickly averted her eyes, but not before noticing the caption mentioning his engagement to Elizabeth Maxwell, daughter of communications magnate Leonard Maxwell. 3 years had passed, yet Alexander's face could still trigger a complex wave of emotions: anger, hurt, and a steely determination that had become her driving force. Caroline closed the newspaper and returned to her coding with renewed intensity. By mid-afternoon, she packed up her materials and headed to the small grocery store near her apartment. Mrs. Jenkins would need to leave by 4, and dinner preparations for 3 hungry boys couldn't wait. The apartment was suspiciously quiet when she returned. She found Mrs. Jenkins in the kitchen, finger pressed to her lips. "All 3 fell asleep after helping with the cookies," she whispered, gesturing toward the living room where the triplets lay sprawled on the old rug, surrounded by books and toys. Caroline set down her groceries and took in the rare sight of all 3 boys sleeping simultaneously. "Thank you for today," she told Mrs. Jenkins. "I finished the interactive assessment module. It's starting to feel real." Mrs. Jenkins nodded approvingly. "Your boys are helping more than they know. I've never seen such different learning styles so clearly demonstrated." Oliver approached our counting game mathematically. Ethan wanted to understand the underlying logic, and Noah created a visual system that honestly made more sense than the traditional method. Caroline smiled. "They're my test subjects, and inspiration rolled into one." After Mrs. Jenkins left, Caroline worked quietly in the kitchen, preparing dinner while the boys slept. Her mind drifted to the newspaper article, Alexander's smiling face, his perfect fiancée, his seemingly charmed life. She wondered if he ever thought about the 3 lives he'd rejected, if he ever questioned his choice. The moment of self-pity passed quickly. Alexander's rejection had forged her into someone stronger, more determined than she'd ever been. His absence had created space for her sons to become extraordinary on their own terms. The boys woke in stages, Ethan first, then Oliver, Noah last as usual. Dinner was spaghetti, a favorite that generated predictable mess but guaranteed empty plates. Caroline listened to their 3-year-old perspectives on the day's adventures with Mrs. Jenkins, marveling at how differently each boy described the same activities. Bedtime rituals consumed the next 2 hours. Baths, stories, negotiations for just one more book that Caroline indulged more often than not. By 8:30, all 3 were tucked into their beds, eyes heavy with sleep. "Love you to the moon," Caroline whispered their nightly ritual. "And back," they chorused sleepily. Exhausted but determined, Caroline returned to her laptop at the kitchen table. She worked steadily until her eyes burned with fatigue, adding features to her prototype that had occurred to her while watching the boys play. Just before midnight, while saving her work, Caroline noticed an email that made her heart race. Chicago Tech Innovators was announcing their annual startup competition with a prize of $150,000 for the best educational technology concept. Her cursor hovered over the entry form link. Doubt crept in immediately. Who would take seriously a single mother without formal technology credentials? Her competition would be polished teams from prestigious universities, established programmers with industry connections. "You're common, Caroline. Predictable." Alexander's dismissive voice echoed in her memory. Her hands clenched into fists on the keyboard. She was raising 3 children alone while building something that could change educational access for thousands. There was nothing common about her journey or her vision. Caroline opened the entry form and began filling it out methodically. The submission deadline was 6 weeks away, enough time to refine her prototype into something that could impress the judges. Night after night, Caroline worked until exhaustion overtook her. She fell asleep at her keyboard more than once, waking with key impressions on her cheek and new ideas in her mind. The boys unknowingly contributed to the project, Ethan finding interface bugs that Caroline hadn't noticed, Oliver's mathematical patterns informing the assessment algorithms, Noah's visual approach inspiring more intuitive design. On the final night before submission, Caroline sat staring at her completed entry. The EduMinds prototype wasn't perfect, but it was revolutionary in its approach to personalized learning. Her finger hovered over the submit button, doubt and hope warring within her. A noise from the boys' room drew her attention. She found Noah standing beside his bed, eyes still closed in sleep. "Smart," he murmured, still dreaming. "Mommy made smart things." Caroline guided him gently back to bed, tucking the covers around his small form. Returning to her computer, she pressed submit without further hesitation. 2 weeks of anxious waiting followed. Caroline checked her email obsessively between work and childcare, hope fading as days passed without news. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, while the boys napped and Mrs. Jenkins knitted quietly in the corner, the message arrived. Caroline stared at the screen, reading the first line repeatedly to ensure she understood. "Congratulations, your project EduMinds has been selected as a finalist." While Caroline cried tears of joy holding the finalist letter, she couldn't imagine that this competition would place her face-to-face with Leonard Maxwell, Alexander's future father-in-law, who would see in her idea the potential that Alexander himself had rejected years before. Caroline stared at the finalist notification email for so long that her screen dimmed to conserve battery. She jolted herself back to reality, quickly tapping the spacebar. This was happening. EduMinds had been selected as one of just 5 finalists for the Chicago Tech Innovators competition. The prize, $150,000, wasn't just money. It was a future, legitimacy, a chance to transform her late-night coding sessions into something real. The email contained detailed instructions. Finalists would present their projects to a panel of judges in 3 weeks at the Chicago Innovation Center. 10 minutes to demonstrate, 5 for questions. Professional, concise, compelling. "I did it," she whispered, pressing her hand to her mouth as tears threatened. The boys were napping, and she allowed herself this brief moment of pure, unfiltered joy. She printed the acceptance letter on her ancient printer, the mechanical wheeze seeming celebratory today rather than annoying. As the paper emerged, Caroline already began mentally preparing her presentation. She would need to refine the prototype, create clear visuals, practice her pitch until it flowed naturally. When Mrs. Jenkins arrived that afternoon, Caroline shared her news, voice trembling with excitement. "I'm not surprised," the older woman said, squeezing Caroline's hand. "Your boys aren't the only ones with exceptional gifts." "I'll need to practice my presentation," Caroline explained. "Could you possibly watch them for a few extra hours on some days?" "Of course," Mrs. Jenkins replied without hesitation. "This could change everything for you four." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of intense preparation. Caroline refined her prototype, addressing small bugs and enhancing the user interface. During the day, she maintained her routines with the boys, but every evening after their bedtime, she transformed into a tech entrepreneur, rehearsing her presentation in front of her bathroom mirror while brushing her teeth. EduMinds identifies each student's unique learning style through interactive assessments she practiced, analyzing her delivery for confidence and clarity. Then it adapts content presentation in real time, maximizing engagement and retention. 7 days before the competition, Caroline received an email listing the judging panel. Her heart nearly stopped when she read the third name, Leonard Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Communications, the father of Elizabeth Maxwell, Alexander's fiancée. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. After a moment of panic, determination replaced fear. If Leonard Maxwell was judging, she would simply have to be so impressive that her connection to Alexander wouldn't matter, because she certainly wouldn't mention it. The night before the presentation, Caroline laid out her only professional outfit, a navy blue dress purchased at a consignment store and carefully tailored to fit her post-pregnancy body. She polished her modest heels and packed her laptop bag with multiple backups of her presentation. Everything was ready except for one critical detail: childcare. Mrs. Jenkins had committed to watching the boys during the competition, giving Caroline peace of mind to focus completely on her presentation. The morning of the competition, Caroline woke at 5, mentally rehearsing while preparing breakfast. The boys sensed her excitement, unusually cooperative as she dressed them in their best outfits, small button-down shirts and khaki pants she'd found on clearance. "You look pretty, Mommy," Noah said, touching her dress with approval. "Very professional," Ethan added, clearly mimicking a phrase he'd heard. "Blue is statistically the most trustworthy color," Oliver informed her seriously. At 7:30, Caroline's phone rang. The display showed Mrs. Jenkins' name. "Caroline, I'm so sorry," came the older woman's voice, raspy and weak. "I woke up with a fever of 103. The doctor thinks it's pneumonia. I can't be around the boys." Caroline's stomach dropped. "Don't worry about us," she assured Mrs. Jenkins, mind racing for solutions. "Just focus on getting better." After hanging up, Caroline sat heavily at the kitchen table. The competition began at 10. Every backup childcare option ran through her mind. The neighbor with 4 children of her own, already overwhelmed. The community center drop-in childcare that required 48-hour advance registration. The prohibitively expensive last-minute babysitting service. No viable options emerged. After 3 years of solving impossible problems, Caroline faced a true impasse. She could either miss the competition that might change their lives or somehow bring 3 active 3-year-olds to a professional event where they would need to sit quietly for hours. Both choices seemed impossible. "Mommy sad?" Noah asked, climbing into her lap. Caroline hugged him close. "Mommy has a very important meeting today, but Mrs. Jenkins is sick and can't watch you." "We go with you," Ethan stated simply, as if solving an obvious problem. Caroline looked at her 3 sons, considering the unthinkable. What if she did bring them? If she packed their backpacks with quiet activities, favorite snacks, and clear instructions? It was a recipe for disaster, but perhaps better than not showing up at all. "If you come with Mommy," she said slowly, "you would need to be extraordinarily well-behaved. This is very important for our future." "We can be good," Ethan promised solemnly. "I'll count to 1,000 silently," offered Oliver. "I'll draw quietly," Noah whispered. Decision made, Caroline moved with urgent efficiency, packing 3 small backpacks with coloring books, silent toys, and favorite snacks. She charged her tablet with educational games they loved, packed extra clothes for emergencies, and wrote her presentation order number on 3 small cards. "If we get separated, give this to any adult," she instructed, tucking the cards into their pockets. "It has my phone number and where to find me." The taxi ride downtown was tense, Caroline alternating between reviewing presentation notes and keeping the boys entertained. They arrived at the gleaming Chicago Innovation Center 45 minutes early, Caroline clutching 3 small hands as they approached the registration desk. The woman behind the counter looked from Caroline to the triplets with poorly concealed disapproval. "Childcare emergency," Caroline explained simply, signing in. "They'll be very quiet." The woman's expression suggested strong doubt, but she handed over Caroline's participant badge without comment. Inside the presentation hall, Caroline selected seats near the back, arranging the boys with military precision. "Remember, absolute best behavior," she whispered. "This could change everything for us." As other participants arrived, mostly young men in expensive casual attire or women in sleek business suits, curious glances were directed at Caroline and her 3 identical shadows. She felt simultaneously invisible as a competitor and conspicuously out of place as a mother. The judges entered last. Caroline recognized Leonard Maxwell immediately from news photos. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the same commanding presence his future son-in-law cultivated. He took his seat at the center of the judging panel without noticing her. The first 3 presentations proceeded smoothly, polished teams with elaborate slide decks and confident deliveries. Caroline watched with growing anxiety, the boys remarkably well-behaved beside her but clearly growing restless. Oliver had counted all the ceiling tiles twice. Ethan was fidgeting slightly. Noah's drawing was expanding beyond his paper onto the seat. When the 4th presenter finished, the moderator called, "Number 5, Caroline Miller, EduMinds. Please prepare to present." Caroline gathered her laptop, leaning down to the triplets. "I need to go to the front now. Please stay perfectly quiet." "Good luck, Mommy," Ethan whispered. Caroline approached the presentation area, connecting her laptop to the projector with hands that trembled slightly. As her opening slide appeared on screen, she took a deep breath and looked out at the audience. In that moment, watching her sons trying so valiantly to sit still, a radical idea formed. Instead of hiding them as an inconvenience, what if she used them as a demonstration? "Good morning," she began confidently. "My name is Caroline Miller, and I'm the creator of EduMinds, an adaptive learning platform that recognizes and responds to individual learning styles." She gestured toward the back of the room. "I'd like to invite my associates to join me for this demonstration." A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience as 3 identical 3-year-olds made their way to the front, solemn-faced and holding hands in a chain. "These are Ethan, Oliver, and Noah," Caroline introduced. They're identical triplets with identical DNA, raised in identical environments, yet they process information in completely different ways, exactly the challenge our educational system faces every day. The judges sat up straighter, suddenly engaged. Leonard Maxwell removed his reading glasses, his gaze sharp with interest. Caroline opened her prototype on the main screen, and 3 smaller versions on tablets she quickly distributed to the boys, who took them with practiced ease. EduMinds begins with an assessment that appears game-like to the user, she explained as the boys interacted with the tablets. Watch how differently each child approaches the same task. The audience observed, fascinated, as Ethan methodically explored all options before deciding. Oliver rapidly calculated numerical patterns, and Noah intuitively navigated through visual cues. The system recognizes these differences, Caroline continued, showing the back-end analytics, and automatically adjusts content delivery to match each learning style. For the next 7 minutes, Caroline delivered a flawless presentation, using her sons as real-time demonstration subjects. When one of the judges asked a technical question about the algorithm, Ethan piped up unexpectedly. "It's like a smart puzzle that learns how you think," he explained earnestly. "The computer watches how you solve problems." Leonard Maxwell chuckled, clearly charmed. "Young man, that's one of the clearest explanations of machine learning I've heard." Another judge asked about implementation costs for schools with limited budgets. "That's our primary focus," Caroline answered. EduMinds is designed to work on existing school equipment, even older models, making it accessible to underserved communities. "The loading time is 7% faster than other programs," Oliver added precisely. I counted. By the time the buzzer sounded, ending her presentation, Caroline knew something extraordinary had happened. What began as a potential disaster had transformed into the most authentic, compelling demonstration of the day. The judges were smiling. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Leonard Maxwell was making notes with evident interest. Caroline gathered her materials and led the boys back to their seats, heart pounding with cautious hope. The final presentation seemed to drag endlessly, the triplets now fidgeting openly after their moment in the spotlight. Finally, the judges left to deliberate. Caroline took the boys to the lobby for a bathroom break and snacks, receiving surprisingly warm smiles from fellow competitors. "Mom of the Year and Tech Innovator," commented one young man in a hoodie. "Seriously impressive." When they returned, the judges had already resumed their places. The moderator approached the microphone. "After careful consideration, we are pleased to announce that the grand prize winner of this year's Chicago Tech Innovators Competition is EduMinds by Caroline Miller." The room erupted in applause. Caroline sat frozen in disbelief until Ethan tugged her hand. "Mommy, we won!" he whispered loudly. She walked to the stage in a daze, the triplets following like ducklings. As she accepted the ceremonial check, Leonard Maxwell stepped forward to shake her hand. "Remarkable presentation," he said, studying her with intelligent eyes. "Your technology has extraordinary potential, but I'm equally impressed by how you handled an obvious childcare crisis with such creativity." "Necessity breeds innovation," Caroline replied, finding her voice. "Indeed." He handed her a business card. "I'd like you to consider joining our technology incubator at Maxwell Communications. Your project deserves the resources to grow properly." Caroline looked at the card, recognizing the name Maxwell with a jolt of irony. She hesitated briefly, knowing this connection would eventually lead to Alexander's orbit, then firmly shook Leonard's hand. "Thank you. I'd be honored to discuss it." As she accepted the check and place in the incubator, Caroline didn't know she was taking the first step toward an inevitable collision with Alexander, whose engagement to Elizabeth Maxwell would be announced in that same incubator just 3 months later. Caroline entered the Maxwell Communications Technology Incubator, clutching her keycard like a talisman. The sleek glass doors slid open, revealing a space that felt worlds away from her cramped apartment. Exposed brick walls, ergonomic furniture, and state-of-the-art technology surrounded her. Most importantly, there was the small office with her name, Caroline Miller, EduMinds, printed on the door. She ran her fingers over the lettering, still disbelieving. 2 months had passed since winning the Chicago Tech Innovators Competition, and her life had transformed almost beyond recognition. The prize money had allowed her to upgrade her ancient laptop, hire a part-time programmer to assist with development, and move to a slightly larger apartment in a safer neighborhood. The boys now shared a bedroom with actual beds instead of mattresses on the floor. Caroline set down her bag and surveyed her new workspace. A high-end computer setup occupied the desk, with dual monitors and processing power she'd only dreamed of before. A small conference table filled the corner, perfect for meetings with potential investors or collaborative work sessions. Her phone chimed with a reminder: interview at 11 o'clock. Leonard Maxwell was helping her build a small but dedicated team, starting with her first official employee. The first candidate arrived precisely on time, Maya Chen, a recent computer science graduate with a minor in early childhood education. Caroline immediately liked her focused energy and genuine interest in educational accessibility. "I can't offer the salary you'd get at Google or Microsoft," Caroline explained candidly after they'd discussed Maya's qualifications. "But I can promise you'll be building something meaningful, something that could change how children learn." Maya leaned forward, eyes bright with interest. "I've turned down 2 corporate offers already. They wanted me to optimize ad delivery algorithms." She made a face. "I'd rather work on something that matters, especially for underserved communities." Caroline smiled, recognizing a kindred spirit. "Welcome to EduMinds." With the prize money and Maxwell's incubator resources, Caroline's vision began taking tangible shape. The prototype transformed into a robust platform with enhanced features and sleeker interface. Maya's programming skills complemented Caroline's conceptual approach perfectly, and together they made rapid progress. The triplets, now 5 years old and in kindergarten at a modest public school, remained at the heart of everything. Each evening, they visited her office after school, ostensibly for Caroline to check homework, but inevitably gravitating toward the computers where they tested new features. "This part is confusing," Ethan would point out, his analytical mind catching logical flaws that adults missed. "I counted 17 seconds for this page to load," Oliver would report, stopwatch in hand. "That's 3 seconds slower than yesterday." "The colors are wrong," Noah would insist, rearranging interface elements with surprising aesthetic judgment. "Blue means sad here, but happy here. It's inconsistent." Caroline integrated their feedback religiously, recognizing that children were her true end users, not the adults who would purchase the software. 6 months into her time at the incubator, Caroline faced her first major presentation to potential investors. Leonard Maxwell had arranged for venture capitalists to review promising startups in his portfolio, and EduMinds was scheduled to present. The meeting room intimidated with its leather chairs and views of downtown Chicago. 5 men in expensive suits sat around the polished table, expressions skeptical as Caroline set up her presentation. Their body language communicated clearly: "Convince us why we should take you seriously." Caroline launched into her practiced pitch, demonstrating EduMind's adaptive algorithms and personalized learning paths. As she spoke, she noticed the investors' attention drifting, their eyes flicking to phones or watches. Then Leonard Maxwell entered, commanding immediate respect with his presence. "Gentlemen, I hope you're paying attention. What Ms. Miller is showing you represents the future of educational technology." Their postures shifted instantly, attention refocusing. Caroline continued with renewed confidence, finishing her demonstration to thoughtful nods. "The concept has merit," said one investor cautiously, "but the education market is notoriously difficult to penetrate. School districts have Byzantine purchasing processes and limited budgets." Before Caroline could respond, Leonard interjected, "Caroline's approach is precisely why I brought her into our incubator. She's targeting underserved schools first, the very institutions other companies ignore because of those complicated processes. There's less competition and more need." The meeting concluded with tentative interest, but no firm commitments. As the investors filed out, Leonard remained behind. "They'll come around," he assured her. "You're building something revolutionary, but revolutions take time." "Thank you for your support," Caroline replied. "I know educational software isn't as exciting as the latest social media platform." Leonard's expression turned contemplative. "I have 7 grandchildren, Caroline. Their education matters more to me than any trending app." He paused. "Which reminds me, my daughter Elizabeth is hosting an engagement party next month. You should attend. Good networking opportunity." Caroline's stomach tightened. Elizabeth Maxwell, Alexander's fiancée. The engagement that Alexander had mentioned that day in his office. The future he'd chosen over her and their children. "I appreciate the invitation," she said carefully, "but I should focus on development milestones right now." Leonard nodded, not pressing further. "Your choice. The offer stands." Caroline breathed easier once he left, grateful for avoiding an inevitable collision with her past, for now. The work consumed her days while the boys filled her evenings and weekends. Despite their limited resources, the triplets thrived. Their kindergarten teacher requested a meeting 3 months into the school year, which Caroline attended with trepidation, fearing behavior problems. Instead, Ms. Sanchez greeted her with excitement. "Mrs. Miller, your boys are extraordinary. They're operating academically at least 2 grade levels above their peers. Have you considered testing them for the gifted program?" Caroline felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. Would that separate them from each other? Not necessarily. They have different strengths, but all 3 qualify. Ethan shows remarkable analytical thinking, Oliver's mathematical abilities are off the charts, and Noah's spatial visual intelligence is like nothing I've seen in 20 years of teaching. The boys entered the gifted program the following month, bringing home increasingly advanced work that Caroline helped them navigate each evening. Even with her growing company demands, she maintained sacred hours with her sons, building Lego structures, reading chapter books, and teaching them basic coding principles they absorbed with astonishing speed. By the time the triplets turned 7, EduMinds had secured its first significant contract, a pilot program with an underfunded Chicago school district serving primarily low-income families. The opportunity arose from Caroline's deliberate strategy of approaching schools most educational technology companies ignored. "These students need adaptive learning more than anyone," she explained to Maya and their now 3-person development team. "If we can prove our system works with the most challenging populations, we can expand anywhere." The pilot launched with nervous excitement. Caroline spent weeks on site, troubleshooting issues and gathering real-world feedback. The results exceeded even her optimistic projections. Student engagement increased dramatically, and early testing showed improved retention of material across all learning styles. The district superintendent, impressed with the preliminary data, invited Caroline to present at a regional education conference. The resulting publicity caught the attention of education reporters, leading to the first media coverage of EduMinds in industry publications. Caroline kept a low profile in these interviews, providing technical information but declining photographs or personal features. Her privacy strategy was partly to protect the boys from unwanted attention and partly to avoid the possibility of Alexander discovering their existence through media coverage. EduMinds reached its first significant milestone when the boys were 7.5, breaking $1 million in annual revenue. The company had grown to 15 employees, each sharing Caroline's vision of accessible, adaptive education. To celebrate, she took the team to dinner at a modest restaurant and presented each employee with a small bonus. That evening, after tucking the boys into bed in their small but comfortable bedrooms, Caroline allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She opened her laptop and searched for Alexander Kingsley, something she avoided for years. His wedding to Elizabeth Maxwell had made business news 18 months earlier. Kingsley Innovations continued its upward trajectory, though recent reviews of their products had been mixed. Alexander's face looked harder in recent photos, success etching lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Caroline closed the browser, feeling nothing but a distant acknowledgement of a life that had diverged from hers. What once caused pain now barely registered as relevant to her existence. The following morning, Caroline received an unexpected alert from the incubator's front desk. "Mrs. Miller, there's been a schedule change. Mr. Kingsley and Ms. Maxwell will be touring the incubator today at 2 o'clock. Caroline's heart raced. After years of careful avoidance, Alexander would be in the same building, possibly walking past her office. Worse, the boys were scheduled to visit after school, as they did every Thursday. "Thank you for the heads up," she replied calmly, mind already calculating contingencies. When the triplets arrived at 1:30, Caroline ushered them quickly into her office, closing the blinds. "We're playing a hiding game today," she explained, keeping her voice light. "We need to stay very quiet in here until I say it's safe to come out." "Like spies?" Ethan asked, immediately intrigued. "Exactly like spies," Caroline confirmed, setting them up with tablets loaded with educational games. "Secret agents on a special mission." Through a crack in the blinds, Caroline watched Alexander and Elizabeth pass by, accompanied by Leonard Maxwell and several incubator executives. Alexander looked exactly as she remembered, confident to the point of arrogance, his expensive suit and perfect hair projecting success and control. Elizabeth clung to his arm, diamond engagement ring catching the light. They passed without noticing her office, but Caroline's heart didn't slow until the elevator doors closed behind them. She sank into her chair, hands trembling slightly. "Can we come out now?" Noah whispered, sensitive as always to her emotions. "Mission accomplished," she announced, forcing brightness into her voice. "You were perfect secret agents." That night, after the boys were asleep, Caroline stood at her kitchen window staring at the city lights. The near miss with Alexander had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Seeing him in person, still handsome, still successful, still moving through life as if she and the boys had never existed, reignited a determination she thought had settled into simple ambition. "We're going to grow so big he can't ignore us," she whispered to the sleeping city. "Not for revenge, for vindication." The next morning, she called a real estate agent. It was time to look for their first real home, something with a yard, separate bedrooms for each boy, and a proper office where she could work when needed. A home that would erase the last vestiges of the struggling single mother Alexander had dismissed so easily. While Caroline turned the key in their new front door, she couldn't imagine that in less than 10 years, she would be purchasing an entire building in downtown Chicago, while Alexander Kingsley lost his luxury penthouse to relentless creditors. The door of Caroline's new home closed behind the real estate agent with a solid, satisfying click. Alone in the entryway, she pressed her back against the door and released a long breath. After years of cramped apartments with paper-thin walls, this modest but well-maintained 3-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood represented more than shelter. It was tangible proof of how far they had come. "Boys!" she called. "Come explore our new home!" The triplets, now 10 years old, thundered down the stairs they had been investigating. Though identical in appearance with the same dark hair and blue-gray eyes that occasionally caused Caroline's heart to clench when she caught Alexander's features reflected in their faces, their personalities had diverged dramatically. "Mom, I counted 17 steps exactly," announced Oliver, notebook already filled with measurements and calculations. "The second floor is approximately 912 square feet based on my pacing." Ethan was already examining the security system panel near the door. "This is a model TX440. I read about it online. I can program it to recognize our specific entry patterns." Noah trailed behind, eyes wide as he absorbed the space aesthetically. "The light here is perfect for my drawing table," he said quietly, pointing to a corner of the living room where sunshine spilled through bay windows. Caroline smiled, watching them scatter to claim bedrooms and explore every nook of the house that was finally theirs. Not a rental, not temporary, but purchased with the proceeds from EduMind's expanding success. The company had grown explosively over the past 3 years. What began as educational software for underfunded schools had expanded to serve districts nationwide, with interest growing internationally. Caroline now led a team of 35 employees working from offices that occupied a full floor in the Maxwell Communications building. Leonard Maxwell had proven to be more than a benefactor. He had become a true mentor, guiding Caroline through the complexities of scaling a tech startup while fiercely protecting her privacy. He never again mentioned Alexander or Elizabeth after Caroline's polite refusal to attend their engagement party, seeming to intuit that there was history better left undisturbed. That evening, after pizza on the floor of their unfurnished dining room, a celebration tradition dating back to their first apartment, Caroline sat on the front porch watching the boys explore the small yard. Her phone chimed with an email notification that made her breath catch. EduMinds had been selected for a feature in EdTech Innovator magazine. The article would highlight their successful implementation in Singapore's school system, their first international contract. Caroline had spent months adapting the platform for different cultural learning contexts, and the results had exceeded projections. The Singapore Ministry of Education was already discussing expanded implementation. While the recognition thrilled her, the request for a photo shoot and extensive interview triggered her protective instincts. Since founding EduMinds, Caroline had maintained a deliberately low profile, providing only a professional headshot and minimal biographical information in press materials. The less visible she remained, the less likely Alexander would discover the successful company and the 3 boys that had emerged from his rejection. She replied to the editor with a diplomatic compromise. She would provide expanded technical information and allow photography of the software in use, but would limit personal exposure to a brief interview conducted via email. The company's work, not its founder, should be the focus. This strategy had served her well. EduMinds had garnered respect in educational technology circles without attracting the wider business media attention that might bring Alexander's world colliding with hers. The triplets attended Lakeside Academy now, a prestigious private school that had offered them merit scholarships after their exceptional test scores. There, they were simply the brilliant Miller triplets, their parentage unremarkable and unquestioned. "Mom!" Ethan called from the yard, interrupting her thoughts. "Can we set up the telescope tonight? The backyard has much less light pollution than our old apartment." Caroline joined them outside, ruffling Ethan's hair affectionately. "Let's get it set up after dinner. We should be able to see Jupiter tonight." The following weeks established new rhythms in their household. The boys thrived with their own bedrooms for the first time, though Caroline often found them gathered in one room anyway, their connection transcending physical space. Their academic achievements continued to impress even the experienced faculty at Lakeside Academy, each boy excelling in different areas while maintaining strong performance across all subjects. On a crisp October afternoon, Caroline arrived at Lakeside for the annual science fair. The school's gymnasium had been transformed into a showcase of student projects, with judges from local universities and technology companies evaluating entries. Ethan's project stood out immediately, a sophisticated adaptation of EduMinds' core technology designed specifically for students with dyslexia. His display included compelling before and after demonstrations showing how the modified algorithm helped struggling readers identify and process text more effectively. Caroline watched proudly as her son confidently explained his work to impressed judges, his explanation precise and accessible without condescension. At 10 years old, Ethan demonstrated a natural ability to communicate complex concepts that many adult engineers lacked. "Remarkable work, young man," commented one judge, making notes on his clipboard. "Have you considered how this might be implemented more broadly?" "Yes, sir," Ethan replied earnestly. "The algorithm is scalable and could be integrated into existing educational platforms with minimal additional resource requirements." The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly not expecting such a sophisticated answer from a fifth grader. He extended his hand to Caroline, who had approached as the judging concluded. "Dr. Thomas Renwick, Kingsley Innovations." Your son has extraordinary talent. We're always looking for exceptional minds for our junior development program." Caroline froze momentarily at the company name, maintaining her composed smile through sheer will. "Thank you. Ethan is certainly passionate about accessible technology. If he's interested in technology development, we offer weekend workshops for gifted students," Dr. Renwick continued, retrieving a business card. "With his aptitude, he could qualify for our summer internship program despite being younger than our usual participants." Caroline accepted the card with a polite nod. "That's very kind. He's quite busy with multiple interests, but we'll certainly consider it." As Dr. Renwick moved to the next project, Ethan looked up at Caroline with excitement. "Mom, Kingsley Innovations. They're one of the biggest tech companies in Chicago. Can I go to their workshops?" Caroline tucked the card into her pocket, heart racing. "Let's discuss it later, honey. You should prepare for the awards announcement." The irony wasn't lost on her. Alexander's company trying to recruit the son he'd rejected before birth, attracted by the very brilliance he'd never bothered to discover. When Ethan was announced as the first-place winner in the technology division, Caroline's pride was tinged with a complex emotion she couldn't quite name. Not quite vindication, not quite anger, but something sharp and bittersweet. Similar scenarios played out throughout the year. Oliver won the regional mathematics competition, his photo appearing in the local newspaper with a caption celebrating his perfect score. Caroline carefully clipped and saved the article, but made no effort to share it more widely. Noah's innovative visual interface designs caught the attention of his computer science teacher, who incorporated elements into the school's learning management system. As the triplets' accomplishments accumulated, Caroline found herself increasingly strategic about their public presence. She declined Oliver's nomination to a televised academic competition, citing schedule conflicts. When Noah's artwork was selected for a citywide exhibition, she attended the opening night but kept him away from photographers. These protective measures weren't just about avoiding Alexander. Caroline genuinely believed her sons deserved normal childhoods despite their exceptional abilities. Fame or public recognition too early could distort their development and values. EduMinds continued its steady growth, expanding into new markets and developing enhanced features. Caroline's leadership style emphasized sustainable growth over rapid expansion, quality over flashy features. When a major technology corporation approached with an acquisition offer of $50 million, many expected her to accept immediately. Instead, Caroline called an all-hands meeting in their office. "I've received an offer to purchase EduMinds," she announced to her team. "I'm declining." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. Her CFO looked particularly shocked. "Caroline, $50 million is well above market valuation. We should at least consider—" "We're not selling," Caroline interrupted firmly. "EduMinds isn't finished growing yet. Our mission to democratize quality education is just beginning." That evening, Caroline prepared a simple chocolate cake to celebrate the triplets' 10th birthday. Though she could now afford lavish parties and expensive gifts, she maintained certain traditions from leaner times. Homemade cake, thoughtfully chosen presents that emphasized experience over extravagance, and their special ritual of sharing their dreams for the coming year. "I want to create an algorithm that can identify learning disabilities earlier," Ethan shared, always focused on helping others. "I'm going to win the National Mathematics Championship this year," Oliver declared with characteristic confidence. "I want to design a completely new way for kids to interact with computers," Noah said softly. "Something no one has thought of yet." As Caroline listened to their ambitious plans, she felt a swell of emotion that threatened to overflow. These extraordinary children had emerged from her darkest moment, their existence a daily reminder that rejection had ultimately gifted her with purpose and joy beyond measure. Later, after the boys were asleep, Caroline walked through their new backyard beneath a sky scattered with stars. She found herself thinking of the frightened, pregnant young woman she'd been, sitting on a park bench watching Alexander's face on a billboard proclaiming him the future of innovation. Now she stood on property she owned, 3 brilliant sons sleeping safely inside, a multi-million-dollar company bearing her name, and acquisition offers she could afford to refuse. The future did have a name after all, but it wasn't Kingsley. It was Miller. The following morning, Caroline took the boys to see a vacant lot downtown where commercial real estate was still recovering from the recession. One day, she told them, "We'll build our own headquarters here. No more rented offices." The boys immediately began planning the building, Ethan focusing on smart technology integration, Oliver calculating optimal space utilization, and Noah sketching a striking architectural concept on his tablet. "When we grow up," Ethan said confidently, "EduMinds is going to be in every school in the world." While Caroline listened to her sons dream about the future of EduMinds, none of them could imagine that in just 5 years they would be on stage at the country's largest technology conference, where a career-declining Alexander Kingsley would see them for the first time. Caroline stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, gazing out at the Chicago skyline. The view reminded her of Alexander's office from 15 years ago, but the woman reflected in the glass bore little resemblance to the trembling young teacher who had once been escorted out by security. Her navy-tailored suit emphasized her confident posture, her chestnut hair now styled in a sophisticated bob that framed features no longer softened by youth, but sharpened by determination and success. "The future has a name," she whispered, echoing Alexander's old billboard slogan. She smiled at the irony. The future indeed had a name, and it was Miller. Her desk phone buzzed. "Ms. Miller, your speech draft for the conference is ready for review, and Ethan is online too." "Thank you, Gloria. Put Ethan through." "Mom!" Her son's enthusiastic voice filled the line. "I've optimized the algorithm for the EduMinds Platform 5.0. We increased information retention by 28% with the new augmented reality module." Caroline smiled, hearing the excitement in his voice. At 14, Ethan had already contributed significantly to EduMinds' technical architecture, his innate understanding of how people processed information proving invaluable. "That's fantastic. Will you have the data ready for my keynote? I'd like to include those results." "Already compiled and sent to your presentation team," Ethan replied efficiently. "Oliver's analyzing the financial projections for the announcement too." "Perfect. I'll see you boys at home for dinner. We need to review protocols for the conference." After ending the call, Caroline turned to the stack of documents requiring her attention. EduMinds had grown beyond her wildest dreams, now valued at nearly $5 billion, with offices in 11 countries and over 400 employees. The upcoming National Educational Technology Conference would feature her major announcement: EduMinds' acquisition of Learning Future for $850 million, a strategic move to expand their global reach. Caroline had spent weeks preparing her keynote address, knowing that industry leaders, investors, and media would scrutinize her every word. As CEO of the fastest-growing educational technology company in the market, her formerly guarded privacy had become increasingly difficult to maintain. The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Miller, your assistant would like a moment. She says it's urgent." Samantha Chen, Maya's younger sister who had joined EduMinds as an intern and risen to become Caroline's indispensable right hand, entered with a tablet and a concerned expression. "Caroline, there's been a last-minute change to the conference speaker lineup." She handed over the tablet. "Thomas Brent canceled due to a family emergency, and they've replaced him with Alexander Kingsley." Caroline's fingers froze on the screen, her carefully constructed professional mask slipping momentarily. After 15 years of strategic avoidance, the universe had finally forced their paths to cross. "I see," she said, voice remarkably steady despite her racing heart. "When did this change happen?" "The announcement went out an hour ago. Kingsley will be presenting on rebuilding after innovation failures, ironic given their recent issues." The Kingsley Innovations privacy scandal had dominated tech news for months. Their facial recognition software had been misused by several government agencies, resulting in civil rights violations and a catastrophic stock plunge. The company that Alexander had once proudly taken public now struggled to maintain investor confidence. "Should we request a schedule adjustment to avoid overlap?" Samantha asked carefully. She knew nothing of Caroline's history with Alexander, but sensed the tension the name created. "No," Caroline decided after a moment. "Adjusting our schedule would raise questions. We'll proceed as planned." After Samantha left, Caroline allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability, closing her eyes and taking several deep breaths. A memory flashed, Alexander's cold voice declaring her too common to be worthy of his name or attention. The same man would now witness her commanding the main stage of the industry's premier event. The irony wasn't lost on her, but the prospect of seeing Alexander again, of him potentially recognizing the triplets, sent anxiety coursing through her veins. For 14 years, she'd protected her sons from the knowledge of their father's rejection, building a narrative that emphasized their strength as a self-sufficient family unit. Caroline pulled up the latest news coverage of Alexander Kingsley. The handsome young CEO from her memories had aged, distinguished silver at his temples, lines etched around his eyes, his expression in recent photos tense rather than confident. 2 failed marriages had followed his relationship with Elizabeth Maxwell, each dissolution documented in business gossip columns speculating about prenuptial agreements and settlement terms. She closed the browser and turned back to her conference preparations. Whatever happened, she would face Alexander as an equal. No, as his superior in the industry they both inhabited. The frightened young woman he had dismissed no longer existed. That evening, Caroline's driver delivered her to the elegant lakeshore home she had purchased 3 years earlier. The house represented another milestone, located in the same exclusive neighborhood where Alexander once told her she could never belong. Inside, she found the triplets in the spacious kitchen, laptops open on the marble island as they collaborated on various projects. At 14, they had grown into remarkable young men, each displaying exceptional talents that continually amazed Caroline. "Mom!" Oliver looked up from his spreadsheets. "I've been analyzing the market response projections for the Learning Future acquisition announcement. We can expect a 7 to 9% bump in share value immediately with sustained growth if we emphasize the international expansion capabilities." Caroline smiled, setting down her briefcase. "Thank you, Oliver. Those numbers align with our financial team's predictions." Noah spun his laptop around, showing a stunningly redesigned interface. "I've completed the visualization for students with visual impairments. The contrast ratios exceed accessibility standards by 40%, and the haptic feedback system works with existing hardware." "This is extraordinary, Noah." Caroline squeezed his shoulder, continually impressed by his empathetic approach to design. Ethan looked up from his coding. "I've isolated that bug in the language acquisition module. It was a memory allocation issue affecting processing speed for character-based languages. These conversations had become their normal. 3 teenage boys whose intellectual capabilities had long since surpassed most adults. Yet Caroline had worked diligently to ensure they remained grounded, emotionally healthy, and socially adept despite their genius-level abilities. "The conference starts tomorrow," Caroline reminded them, opening the refrigerator to begin dinner preparations. Though she could afford a private chef, cooking for her sons remained a cherished ritual. "We should review the schedule and expectations." "Already memorized it," Oliver replied, pulling up the conference agenda. "Your keynote is at 10 in the morning, followed by the press conference announcing the acquisition at 11:30. The gala dinner is at 7, Noah added. "I've already selected my tuxedo." Caroline hesitated, then decided they needed to be prepared. "There's been a speaker change. Alexander Kingsley will be presenting tomorrow afternoon." The boys exchanged glances, recognizing the name from Business News. "The Kingsley Innovations CEO?" Ethan asked, curiosity piqued. "The one whose company lost 40% of market value after the privacy scandal?" "Yes," Caroline confirmed. measuring pasta into boiling water. His presentation replaces Thomas Brent's session on recovery strategies. Interesting case study in failed ethical oversight, Noah commented, always sensitive to the human impact of technology decisions. Caroline studied their faces, searching for any sign they might have discovered their connection to Alexander. She had never lied about their paternity, simply saying their biological father wasn't prepared for fatherhood when asked directly. As they grew older, the questions had gradually stopped, their family unit complete without his presence. "Will we meet any of the other presenters?" Ethan asked. "Possibly at the gala. Remember, you're representing EduMinds as much as I am. The industry sees you three as the company's future leadership. We won't embarrass the CEO of EduMinds," Oliver promised with a small smile. "Our behavior will be statistically above average." During dinner, Caroline's assistant called with another update. "The press list for tomorrow has expanded significantly since the Kingsley announcement. Apparently, his appearance marks a comeback attempt after their recent troubles." After ending the call, Caroline found the triplets watching her intently. "You seem concerned about Kingsley's presence," Ethan observed, his analytical mind missing nothing. "Is there history between EduMinds and Kingsley Innovations we should know about?" Caroline chose her words carefully. "No business history. I've encountered Alexander Kingsley socially in the past, before EduMinds existed." "Your pulse increased when his name was mentioned," Noah noted gently. "His emotional intelligence often made him the most perceptive of the three." Caroline sighed. The boys were too observant to fool completely. It was a long time ago. Professional situations can sometimes revive old social awkwardness. They accepted this explanation without further questions, but Caroline knew her sons. They would observe, analyze, and form their own conclusions, a skill set she had deliberately nurtured in them. That night, Caroline stood before her closet, selecting her outfit for the conference with uncharacteristic indecision. She finally chose a tailored sapphire blue suit that complemented her eyes and projected confident authority. The diamond earrings, her gift to herself when EduMinds reached its first billion-dollar valuation, would be her only jewelry. She reviewed her keynote address one final time, focusing on the journey that had brought EduMinds to this moment. The script contained no mention of struggling as a single mother or overcoming rejection. Caroline had long since decided that her success would stand on its own merits, not as a triumph over adversity narrative. In the morning, her household ran with clockwork precision. The triplets, impeccable in their tailored suits, joined her in the kitchen for a quick breakfast before her driver arrived. "Remember," Caroline said as they entered the sleek company limousine, "this announcement positions EduMinds for international expansion that could transform educational access globally. Everything else is secondary." The boys nodded solemnly, understanding the magnitude of the day ahead. As the limousine glided through Chicago's morning traffic toward the convention center, Caroline mentally rehearsed her presentation, refusing to let thoughts of Alexander distract her from this pivotal moment. She couldn't know that in the next 24 hours, Chicago would witness the most talked-about confrontation in the business world, and her sons would discover the truth she had protected for 15 years. The grand ballroom of the Chicago Innovation Center buzzed with anticipation. Technology executives, investors, and media representatives filled the rows of chairs, the murmur of conversations creating a steady hum beneath the gleaming chandeliers. The annual National Educational Technology Conference had always attracted the industry's elite, but this year's attendance had broken records, partly due to the buzz around EduMinds' rumored acquisition announcement, and partly because of Alexander Kingsley's last-minute addition to the speaker lineup. Caroline observed the growing crowd from a small monitoring room adjacent to the stage. Her team moved efficiently around her, checking audio levels and queuing up presentation slides. The familiar pre-presentation butterflies fluttered in her stomach, though years of high-stakes pitches and keynotes had taught her to channel that energy into compelling delivery rather than anxiety. "5 minutes, Ms. Miller." her stage manager informed her. "The hall is at capacity." Caroline nodded, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her sapphire suit. In the first row, she could see her 3 sons sitting perfectly straight, laptops open to monitor social media reactions in real time. Pride swelled in her chest at their poised presence. At 14, they carried themselves with a maturity that belied their age. She scanned the audience again, unable to stop herself from searching for one particular face. The doors at the back of the hall opened, and Caroline's breath caught in her throat. Alexander Kingsley entered, accompanied by a much younger woman, his 3rd wife, if Caroline recalled correctly from the business gossip. He wore an expertly tailored gray suit that couldn't quite disguise a slight thickening around his middle that hadn't been there 15 years ago. Despite the public setbacks his company had faced, he still moved with the entitled confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms. Several attendees turned to acknowledge him, though Caroline noted the greetings seemed respectful rather than enthusiastic, a subtle but telling shift from the adoration he once commanded in tech circles. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the CEO of EduMinds, Caroline Miller." Caroline emerged into the spotlight to enthusiastic applause, striding confidently to center stage. As she faced the audience, she allowed herself one brief glance toward Alexander. He was settling into his seat, attention on his phone rather than the stage, apparently not yet registering her name or presence. "Thank you for that warm welcome," Caroline began, her voice strong and clear. 15 years ago, when I first dreamed of creating adaptive learning technology that could recognize and respond to individual learning styles, the educational technology landscape looked very different. As she launched into her carefully crafted presentation, highlighting EduMind's journey from concept to global leader, Caroline tracked Alexander's reaction from her peripheral vision. The moment of recognition came about 3 minutes into her speech. His head snapped up from his device, eyes widening as he stared at her. His wife noticed his sudden attention, following his gaze to the stage with a curious expression. Caroline continued without missing a beat, displaying data visualizations of EduMind's impact on learning outcomes across diverse student populations. Our recent expansion into European and Asian markets has demonstrated that the need for personalized learning transcends cultural boundaries. Education is the great equalizer, but only when it meets students where they are. Alexander leaned forward in his seat, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief and growing comprehension. Caroline felt a surge of satisfaction as she moved to the announcement portion of her keynote. Today, I'm pleased to announce that EduMinds has acquired Learning Future for $850 million, integrating their groundbreaking language acquisition technology into our global platform. Applause rippled through the audience. This acquisition positions us for expansion into 47 additional countries over the next 18 months. As she detailed the strategic benefits of the acquisition, Caroline could feel Alexander's unrelenting stare. More unsettling was when his gaze shifted from her to the front row, where the triplets sat. Even from the stage, she could see the blood drain from his face as he registered the 3 identical young men, and their unmistakable resemblance to himself at that age. Caroline concluded her presentation to a standing ovation, handling the subsequent questions with practiced ease. As she prepared to leave the stage, she found herself looking directly at Alexander for the first time. Their eyes locked across the crowded room, 15 years of unspoken history suspended between them in that brief exchange. The moderator's voice broke the moment. "Thank you, Ms. Miller, for that inspiring presentation. Please join us in the Lakeside Hall for the press conference in 15 minutes. Caroline exited the stage to be immediately surrounded by her team and the triplets, who had bounded up to join her. "Mom, the social media response is incredible," Ethan reported excitedly. "Mentions of EduMinds have increased 700% in the last 30 minutes. The stock is already up 6 points, Oliver added, studying real-time financial data on his tablet. Noah, always the most emotionally perceptive, was watching her face carefully. "Are you okay?" Your pulse is elevated." Before Caroline could respond, a commotion near the stage door caught their attention. Alexander Kingsley stood there staring at their small group with undisguised shock. His wife tugged at his sleeve, clearly confused by his behavior. "We should head to the press conference," Caroline said quickly, guiding the boys toward the opposite exit. "Gloria will show us the back way." Throughout the press conference, Caroline maintained her professional composure, responding to questions about the acquisition with confident precision. The triplets sat in the front row, occasionally fielding technical questions directed their way by reporters familiar with their contributions to EduMind's development. "Ms. Miller, how does it feel to be the first female CEO to complete an acquisition of this magnitude in the educational technology sector?" asked a reporter from the Chicago Business Journal. Caroline smiled. "It feels like confirmation that our approach to educational technology, prioritizing accessibility and adaptability over flashy features, resonates with educators worldwide. This achievement reflects the dedication of our entire team." She gestured toward her sons, "including these 3 young innovators who have contributed significantly to our development process." The press conference concluded successfully, but Caroline knew the confrontation with Alexander had merely been postponed, not avoided. The gala dinner that evening would make their interaction inevitable. As predicted, Alexander was watching the entrance when Caroline arrived at the grand ballroom of the Chicago Grand Hotel that evening. The triplets flanked her, resplendent in identical tuxedos that emphasized their striking resemblance to the man now staring at them from across the room. "Mom, why is Alexander Kingsley staring at us?" Noah whispered as they made their way to their assigned table. "Perhaps he's interested in your interface design work," Caroline deflected smoothly. "Many companies are watching you 3 with professional interest." Throughout the elaborate dinner, Caroline was acutely aware of Alexander's gaze repeatedly finding her table. His wife appeared increasingly irritated by his distraction, her whispered comments becoming more animated as the evening progressed. "The Kingsley Innovations CEO keeps looking over here," Ethan observed analytically. "Statistical probability suggests more than casual interest." "Do you know him personally?" Oliver asked directly, always the most straightforward of the 3. Caroline chose her words carefully. "We've met in professional contexts. The technology world in Chicago is relatively small." The inevitable confrontation came during the dessert course. Caroline had stepped away to speak with an important educational foundation director when she felt a presence behind her. The conversation around her subtly shifted, people stepping back slightly, creating a small pocket of space. "Caroline." Alexander's voice was exactly as she remembered, confident, slightly husky, with the subtle inflection of privilege. She turned, composing her features into a polite professional mask. "Alexander, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Up close, the years were more evident on his face, fine lines around his eyes, a certain hardness to his jaw that hadn't been there before. Success had aged him, or perhaps the recent struggles of his company had left their mark. You look..." He seemed genuinely at a loss for words, his usual polished demeanor cracking. "Your company is remarkable. I had no idea you'd become so successful in technology." "Life takes unexpected turns," Caroline replied evenly. Alexander's eyes drifted to the triplets' table. "Those young men with you? They're your sons?" "Yes, they are. They look..." He swallowed visibly. "They look remarkably like I did at that age." Caroline maintained her composed expression. "Genetics are fascinating, aren't they?" Alexander's wife appeared at his side, slipping her arm possessively through his. "Darling, you promised to introduce me to the Peterson Venture Group." Her curious gaze assessed Caroline. "You must be Caroline Miller. Your reputation is impressive. They say you turned down Microsoft's acquisition offer last year." "Alexandra, this is an old acquaintance," Alexander explained awkwardly. "We knew each other briefly, many years ago." Understanding dawned in Alexandra's eyes as she looked between Caroline and the triplets' table. "I see," she said, her tone cooling noticeably. "How interesting." The unavoidable moment arrived when Caroline was called to the stage to receive the Visionary in Educational Technology Award, her third consecutive year winning the honor. As she approached the podium, the spotlight illuminating her path, she felt Alexander's eyes following her every move. The presenter, the respected dean of MIT's Education Technology Department, smiled broadly. "Caroline, you're known for having built an empire while raising triplets on your own. How did you overcome all the obstacles in your path?" A momentary silence fell over the ballroom. Caroline's gaze briefly met Alexander's across the crowded room. 15 years of unspoken history hung in the balance of her next words. "Someone once told me I was too ordinary to succeed in this world," she began, her voice steady and clear. "That I should accept my place and disappear. Ironically, that rejection was the greatest gift I ever received." The audience was utterly silent now, captivated. "My sons never needed an absent father because they had a fully present mother. And as for EduMinds, we've built a company valued at nearly $5 billion because we understand that true innovation comes from ordinary people solving real problems, not executives in ivory towers." The pointed remark wasn't lost on the audience. Murmurs rippled through the room as Alexander loosened his tie, visibly uncomfortable. After the ceremony, the inevitable encounter happened near the bar. Alexander, having clearly consumed more alcohol than was prudent, approached Caroline as she chatted with investors. "Caroline," he said, forcing a smile, "what a wonderful surprise. You look impressive." "Alexander, I wasn't expecting to see you here." Her voice was politely distant. "Your sons are remarkable. Very much like me when I was young." He lowered his voice. "Why did you never tell me about them? I would have—" "You told me exactly what you would have done, Alexander, and I left a message about the triplets that you chose to ignore." Caroline maintained a professional smile. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have investors to speak with." "Caroline, wait." He grabbed her arm, drawing curious glances. "Do they know who I am?" "They know your DNA exists in them, but a father is much more than biology. Now, release my arm before I call security." By this point, the triplets had approached, curious about the tense interaction. "Is everything all right, Mom?" Ethan asked, with a confidence eerily reminiscent of young Alexander. "Perfectly fine, darling. This is Alexander Kingsley, a business acquaintance." "Mr. Kingsley from Kingsley Innovations?" Oliver raised an eyebrow. "The company that lost 40% of its market value after last year's data privacy scandal? Interesting business strategy." Alexander paled at the teenager's merciless analysis. "Actually," Noah continued, "your facial recognition technology was the subject of my school project on AI ethics. I used it as a case study on how not to implement technology without considering the social implications." Surrounded by the three young men who were undeniably his sons, analyzing him with the same sharp intelligence he proudly considered his differentiating factor, Alexander felt the weight of 15 years of absence. You're truly exceptional," he stammered. "Thank you," Ethan replied with a polite smile. "Our mother taught us to value knowledge above status. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a presentation about our new accessibility algorithm in 10 minutes. As the young men walked away, Caroline faced Alexander with absolute calm. "They're exceptional not because of your DNA, but despite it." While Caroline breathed deeply, preparing to answer Noah's question, she knew that the moment she had avoided for 15 years had arrived. The truth about Alexander Kingsley would no longer be a secret kept in the shadows, but a revelation that would forever change the Miller family dynamic. Caroline guided the triplets toward the hotel's presidential suite, her mind racing. The world she had carefully constructed over 15 years had just collided with the past she'd worked so hard to outrun. Noah's innocent question still hung in the air between them. "Mom, who is that man who keeps staring at us?" The elevator ascended in uncomfortable silence. Oliver methodically pressed the button for the 32nd floor, the irony not lost on Caroline that they were ascending to the same height from which her life had once plummeted when Alexander had her escorted out of his office. Inside the suite, the boys immediately shed their formal jackets, the veneer of adult sophistication momentarily replaced by teenage restlessness. Caroline kicked off her heels, buying precious seconds to organize her thoughts. "Boys," she began, sinking into the plush sofa, "I need to tell you something I've waited too long to share." The triplets exchanged glances, their intuitive connection allowing silent communication. They arranged themselves around her, Ethan perched on the arm of the sofa, Oliver in the adjacent chair, Noah cross-legged on the coffee table directly facing her. "It's about Alexander Kingsley, isn't it?" Ethan asked quietly. The way he looked at us, it wasn't professional interest. Caroline nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Alexander Kingsley is your biological father." The statement hung in the air, deceptively simple yet monumental in its implications. Noah's eyes widened, Oliver sat completely still, and Ethan's analytical mind visibly processed this new data point against years of family history. "I met him when I was 24, Caroline continued. "I was teaching literature and tutoring his niece. We dated for 6 months. When I discovered I was pregnant, I went to his office thinking we would face it together." She paused, the memory still painful despite the years and success that separated her from that day. "He rejected not just me, but the very idea of you. He offered money to solve the problem and had security escort me out when I refused." Noah's eyes filled with tears. "He didn't want us? At all?" Caroline reached for his hand. "He made it very clear that a family with me didn't fit his image or plans. When I discovered I was carrying triplets, I left one last message telling him. He never responded." "So he knew about us but chose to stay away," Oliver stated flatly, his mathematical mind reducing the emotional complexity to its core equation. "Yes. I made a decision then that I would never define you by his rejection. You would be Miller's, not Kingsley's, and your worth would never be tied to his acknowledgement." Ethan stood and walked to the window, his profile against the night skyline startlingly reminiscent of Alexander. "That's why you were so strategic about our public appearances. You weren't just protecting our privacy, you were preventing him from discovering us." "Initially, yes," Caroline admitted. "Later, it became about protecting you from feeling unwanted. You deserve to develop your identities without the shadow of rejection." "But statistically speaking, we've been better off without him," Oliver observed, already processing data points. "If he had stayed, you might never have founded EduMinds. Our development might have been compromised by his influence." Caroline smiled sadly at Oliver's attempt to rationalize away the hurt. "That may be true, but you deserve to know your history. I should have told you sooner." Noah, always the most emotionally sensitive, asked the question Caroline had dreaded. Why did he look so shocked to see us tonight? If he knew about us, why did he seem surprised? "I think he knew in the abstract that I had his children," Caroline explained carefully. "But seeing 3 young men who look exactly like him, who are clearly exceptional, who carry his genetic legacy but not his name, that made it real in a way it never was before." "He looked at us like we were assets he'd overlooked in a portfolio evaluation," Ethan observed sharply. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Caroline checked the security peephole, her breath catching. Alexander Kingsley stood in the hallway, alone, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. "It's him," she whispered, turning back to her sons. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." The triplets exchanged another of their silent communications before Ethan nodded. "We want to meet him properly, on our terms." Caroline opened the door, maintaining her position as gatekeeper between Alexander and her children. "Alexander, it's rather late for a business call." He looked haggard up close, the confident businessman replaced by someone visibly shaken. "Caroline, please. I need to speak with you. With them." "That's not your decision to make." Her voice was steady. The power dynamic between them irrevocably shifted. "They know who you are now. Whether they want to speak with you is entirely up to them." Alexander ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I've been sitting in the hotel bar for an hour trying to process this. They're remarkable, and they're mine." "No," Caroline corrected firmly. "They're mine. Biology doesn't make you a father, Alexander. Please, Caroline, 5 minutes. I deserve that much." "You deserve nothing," she replied, her voice low but intense. "But they deserve answers if they want them." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter the suite where the triplets stood shoulder to shoulder, a united front. The resemblance between the 4 males in the room was undeniable. The same jawline, the same blue-gray eyes, the same tall, athletic build. But where Alexander's face showed the effects of privilege and recent stress, the boys radiated health, confidence, and curiosity. "Ethan, Oliver, Noah," Alexander acknowledged, clearly having researched their names. I don't know what to say except that seeing you has been overwhelming." "Interesting choice of words," Ethan replied coolly. "Was it equally overwhelming 15 years ago when our mother told you she was pregnant?" Alexander flinched. "I made a terrible mistake, the worst of my life." "A mistake implies a single error in judgment," Oliver noted. "You had multiple opportunities to correct your course. According to probability theory, random chance alone should have resulted in at least one attempt at contact over 15 years. Alexander turned to Caroline, almost pleading. "They're extraordinary, the way they think, the way they express themselves." "They are," Caroline agreed. "They've been extraordinary every day of their lives, Alexander. Not just now that they're successful and impressive." Noah, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Why now? Why are you interested in us now?" It was the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Alexander's expression revealed more than he intended: discomfort, calculation, vulnerability. "My company is struggling," he admitted. "The privacy scandal, failed product launches, investor confidence at an all-time low. Seeing Caroline tonight, seeing what she's built, made me realize how short-sighted I was. And then seeing you three, it was like looking at my younger self, but better, improved, versions of me that made better choices. So we're potentially valuable to your corporate recovery strategy," Ethan summarized bluntly. Alexander looked genuinely stricken. "No, that's not—" "It's exactly what you're thinking," Caroline interrupted. "You don't want to know your sons, Alexander. You want your sons to know you. There's a fundamental difference. I can offer them opportunities, connections, my name." "We already have a name," Oliver stated firmly. "Miller. The name our mother built from nothing while working 18 hours a day to feed us. And as for opportunities, Ethan has already received internship offers from MIT at 14. I've won the National Mathematics Championship 3 consecutive years. Noah developed a translation software for children with disabilities that's being implemented in 28 countries." Alexander sank into a chair, the truth finally hitting home. He had nothing to offer that they hadn't already achieved without him. "You know what's ironic, Alexander?" Caroline said, her voice softer now. "If you had stayed with us, you'd likely be more successful today. I would have been your partner, not your competitor in the educational market. The boys would have been your legacy, not my proof of resilience." The boys exchanged glances again, their silent communication concluding with a nod from Ethan. "We'll meet you for lunch tomorrow," Ethan announced. 12 o'clock at the lakefront restaurant in the hotel, just us and you. We have questions that deserve answers." Alexander looked up, surprised by this concession. "Thank you. I'll be there." After he left, the suite fell silent. Caroline felt a complex mixture of emotions: vindication, lingering anger, but primarily pride in her son's composure and maturity. "Are you sure about this?" she asked them. "We need to understand who he is," Ethan explained. "Not for his sake, but for ours. To close this chapter properly." Noah hugged Caroline fiercely. "You're all we've ever needed, Mom. Meeting him won't change that." "But knowledge is always preferable to ignorance," Oliver added pragmatically. "Even unpleasant knowledge." 2 weeks later, Caroline sat in her office reviewing quarterly projections when her assistant announced that the triplets had returned from their lunch with Alexander, their third meeting since the conference. When they entered, she studied their expressions carefully. "How did it go?" "Enlightening," Ethan answered. "He's not what we expected." "He's trying," Noah offered charitably, "but there's 15 years of absence he can't overcome with a few lunches." "His business model has fundamental flaws," Oliver added, ever practical. "We suggested several strategic pivots, but I'm not optimistic about Kingsley Innovations' long-term prospects." Caroline smiled, recognizing their individual processing styles. "And how do you feel about continuing these meetings?" The boys exchanged their telepathic glance before Ethan spoke for them all. "We've decided we'll maintain occasional contact on our terms. It's interesting from an anthropological perspective, if nothing else. But we've also made it clear that you are our parent. He's just someone who shares our DNA." That evening, alone in her study, Caroline opened her journal and began to write. "The best revenge isn't humiliating the person who hurt you, but living so fully that their absence becomes irrelevant. Today, I finally understood that Alexander is no longer the man who rejected me. He's just someone I vaguely know, the man who inadvertently gave me the 3 greatest gifts of my life and the motivation to become far more than he ever imagined I could be." If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.